it was all destroyed for me in my sophomore year by Mr. Lutz, who made us memorize dates, and I don't have a good memory for things, but there's going to be literally a very brief history, very, very brief. But the reason I wanted to talk about this is not so much the history of Dawson, New Mexico, but the fact that it's a ghost town that remains alive. And that's kind of where I want to focus today. And I do see that we have other folks on here who are Dawsonites, so I would invite them to add at any point. My screen is kind of little, so I think I'm going to put you over here so I can see everybody in case there's a hand raised. I'm hoping everybody can see Carol, because I'm working off of 2 screens here, so we'll see how this goes. I really am so excited to be able to talk about Dawson today. It is a part of my family's history on my mother's side. And, you know, being a New Mexican of many generations on both sides, many of us have this, my mother used to say that when you're born with New Mexico dirt, you always come back to New Mexico dirt. And I think that's true. And so want to talk a little bit why this is interesting to me. So growing up, my father was in the military, but we lived in the South Valley of Albuquerque for my first 5 years. But it seemed to me that when I was with the Dominguez family, there was always, anytime the family got together with my aunts and uncles, my grandma, my grandpa, family members, Dawson always came up as a subject. And it was part of who they were. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized, you know, when I was very young, that my grandparents on the Dominguez side did not come from Albuquerque, that they came from this little area up here in northern New Mexico, around Dawson, Raton, and a couple of other areas, Rivetta, out here outside of Las Vegas. But the one thing that I thought was always interesting is the stories they told were stories of joy, stories of place, stories of community, stories of relationships that continued through adulthood, even when people were traveling the globe, if you will. And it always seemed to me when I heard about Dawson that it was probably this really cool place. They rode horses. My mother told stories of her and her brothers and a couple of friends jumping the trains, getting the train down to Dawson, and the trouble they would get into. But there was this idyllic childhood that I heard from them, that they were running wild in the mountains of New Mexico. They rode horses. They played with their friends. And what was intriguing to me was, I know my grandparents were poor. My grandfather was a coal miner. My grandmother, by the time she was done bearing children, she had 18 children. And so they didn't have a lot of money. They probably handed, I'm sure, things down from one person to the next. But when I heard about Dawson, it was always with this deep love and devotion to the place and its people. So fast forward a number of years, in 2010, I was the president of a national association. And as president, I got to pick where I was going to have our conference. And so I chose Albuquerque. And so a lot of people don't know New Mexico, or if they come to New Mexico, they select Santa Fe as the place to go. And there is so much more to New Mexico than Santa Fe. Not that Santa Fe is bad, but there's so much more. So we decided to do a tour of New Mexico before as part of the publications for the conference. We decided to do a tour and do pictures and post those every couple of weeks on our conference website. And I had heard about these Dawson reunions over the last several years, and I thought, you know what, let's go to this reunion, whatever it is. So my husband and I said, well, we'll go ahead and spend the night in Raton, and we'll go to the reunion the next day. I don't know anybody. We'll be there 10 minutes, and then we'll leave, and then we'll go figure out what we're going to do. We'll hit Las Vegas and other places. But in the meantime, I had contacted the person who was going to be facilitating and organizing the picnic. And we walked in, I went in to sign in and put a name badge on. And this gentleman came up to me and he said, "You're Julia's daughter, aren't you?" And I was totally taken by surprise. I said, "Well, I am. How did you know?" He says, you look just like your mom." Now, I think I look like my dad, but he thought, everybody thinks I look like my mom from this side of the family. And we ended up spending, I want to say, 3 to 4 hours there, meeting people who went to school with my mom. A lot of men and women that she grew up with, went to school with, went to church with, belonged to clubs. They were in band and theater. And as I started to talk to people, I began to ask questions, you know, why this reunion? It's a ghost town. There's nothing here but a few buildings. And some of the main themes that I heard were that, you know, we were poor, but we didn't know we were poor because this community provided everything we needed. And there were people from all over the world, immigrants from all over the world working there in Dawson as coal miners. And when I walked away from that place that afternoon, 3 hours later, thinking I was going to spend 10 there, it became very clear to me that Dawson was a community, not a ghost town. Now, my mom was born in this little town called Van Houten. It's now sitting on the back of the NRA Wittering Center. You have to go along. In fact, we went on a couple of weeks ago when we went to the last reunion. It's out there, and it's a ghost town. They have a sign. They have a couple of places to say this was what was here, but this is what it looks like. And nobody talks about Van Houten. My mom was born there. They had a couple of mine shafts there, but it's not the same as Dawson. So my suggestion in this little presentation is that while ghost towns are what we see here, there's no connection to it. I would suggest that Dawson is no longer a ghost town. It's no longer a place where there's a thriving community, but it's kept alive through its community of descendants and family members. I told you it was going to be brief, and it's brief. I am not a historian, but I think it's interesting. It was owned by the Phelps Dodge Corporation. They had 10 mines. And, you know, when people would come into the country, they would have people to say, you know, do you have a place to go? Do you know where you're going to be going? No, I don't. Well, here's some places where you can go and get a job. And so a lot of people were sent to Dawson to work as coal miners. And what's really interesting is sometimes you find connections that you had no clue. But in doing some research for this presentation, I discovered that the original railway in Dawson, the Dawson Rail, was purchased by Southern Pacific Railroad. Lo and behold, my spouse's father was an executive in New York City and Boston for Southern Pacific Railroad. So there you go. Two ends of the country coming together through a railway and a little town for Dawson. But that was the main rail transportation. So I think for me, some of the things I heard about growing up were some of the various mine disasters that we have had in Dawson. And you'll see two of them listed here. And in the second mine disaster, it's interesting to me that they're actually 10 years apart. 1913 and 1923, that my great-grand uncle, Julian Dominguez, was killed in that mine. One of the cool things that happened at this last year's reunion, which is always held on the even year of Labor Day weekend, was that there was a gentleman called Rick Landers who'd written a song a few years ago. So I'm actually going to try and get this up and running so you can hear it. It's a really cool song. Really appreciate the fact that he shared that this year with all the folks that were at the reunion. I apologize for those of you who've probably heard it on at the Elks Lodge on Saturday night and again on Sunday, but there are folks here who haven't heard it, and I think it's a wonderful song. It's a wonderful tribute to those who do this work, not just at Dawson, but who do this work on a regular basis. We still have mines across the country. So I am going to see how good I am with technology. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and put the full video up. Hopefully.
It's 1913, Red Canyon #2.
It's not working.
Cold dust ignited and dynamite flew. Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, and there's me. We once gonna likely stop.
I'll just let the voice carry.
With the time through. It's 1913.
Oh, sorry.
Did you know half a teaspoon burns fat?
It's not working, so we're going to skip that. I don't want to waste a lot of time trying to play with the technology. These slides will actually be posted up on the NMHU website. So when you do get that, please make sure that you go and listen to the song. It's really quite an amazing piece. Now I'm worried about the video that I want to share, but we'll see how that goes later. So, and please feel free to ask questions as we're going, and raise your hand at the bottom there. There's a little thing that says reactions. You can raise your hand. What I'll do now is just show you some various things that I found, and I will tell you that the bulk of these pictures have been donated to the Facebook Dawson group. There's a lot of people who take part in this. It's been fun to be part of that group because you find a lot of different things, but you can see all of these buildings here. This entire complex was owned by Phelps Dodge, and at the time they were pretty modern facilities. One of the things that I find really fun is to see the, if you imagine back in the days when coal mining was really at its peak, if you've ever lived anywhere where coal is the predominant fuel, imagine the smell. When we lived in England, we heated our home with coal, and we lived in a community that had a lot of coal, and it leaves kind of a little grime on everything. And so imagine you're at this foothills of these mountains and you've got a lot of this coal dust coming down. I think for me, what's one of the most intriguing things is we still have coal mines here, not coal mines, but we have some other mines here in the state. But this was a hard life. I remember my grandpa kind of walked with kind of a forward stoop, and I put it down to the way that they were having to live. You know, you see this working environment. He did have black lung disease, and was, you know, I'm sure most people who worked in the mines most of their life also did, and received a pension for that up until his passing. One of the cool things, if you've never been to Raton, or you haven't stopped for anything other than gas and a quick bite at McDonald's, I would encourage you to go to the Raton Museum. They have a wonderful collection of memorabilia from the mine there. Their hospital and the coal mining industry. Van Houten was not too far from Raton. It was probably maybe 5 miles. So there's a lot of coal mines up there, and so I would encourage you to go. And they have this picture that is, it's quite long. It's probably about 18 inches long, wide, and it's got all these pictures of the coal miners. And you can see these numbers here. People have been trying to identify who these coal miners are. What I find interesting too is you know, my mom used to talk about my dad used to get paid in silver dollars, and sometimes what that meant. But they also got paid by the weight, the amount of coal that they did. And so we found somebody on the Facebook page has a really nice section of just what it was like, how they got paid, and you can see how they were docked or paid. And one of the pieces that I really like to talk about too is this union. They spent some time. I did find some other pieces outside of the Facebook page. It took them a while to be able to get to where they could actually have a union in Dawson. And there was actually the potential of a strike. And they brought in the National Guard to keep people from coming into the area to try to strike up a union. If you recall, there was a lot of strikes and unionization up in Colorado, which caused a lot of different kinds of events there, and they were trying to prevent that here in New Mexico. So the governor actually called in the National Guard. Well, eventually they got the union. And I'm very proud to say that one of the union presidents was my Uncle Tony. He's my Uncle Tony through my mom's sister's husband, but he was the president of the union for, I think, about 4 or 5 years. And one of the things I loved about listening to him, not only with his stories about being a policeman in Kansas City, but his stories about what it was like being a union member, and the true break between the managers and the union, and how sometimes it got pretty rough trying to speak up for the union members to be able to get what they deserved in terms of their rights. It was really quite interesting, and I won't repeat them because they were pretty colorful, but pretty dangerous at the same time. Some of the things that we see in movies, he portrayed in his stories. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I heard over and over and over again, they had everything they needed there. And again, almost everything you see here comes from that Facebook page. And it's, they got paid, but then they had little chips that they could use to go in and buy their merchandise. They had a logbook. It reminds me kind of what was that show? Little House on the Prairie, where you'd go in and they'd put your name down and you'd get your orders in. They even had Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and fairs. They had lodges. They had, it was quite a vibrant community. To go there today and just looking at the landscape, it's almost hard to imagine that it was a full, thriving community, but it was. It was prosperous for those that were the managers, and for those that were the miners, they also had opportunity to take advantage of all these things. One of the, you know, this sort of focuses on the Catholic religion, but one of the things that I think is really interesting is that the Jesuits came in early here in this country, in fact, or to this part of the country. And for those of you who don't know, I used to work at Regis University, and its founding was actually here in Las Vegas. And it was founded by Jesuits who came here to educate those who don't speak English, both the Native Americans and the Spanish. And they worked quite heavily in this northern New Mexico region and brought the Catholic faith to here. And but when you go to the cemetery in Dawson, and I have pictures of the cemetery, what's really amazing to me about that cemetery is you not only see the grouped burials by ethnicity, you see them by religion too. And that's kind of a cool thing. You don't see that too often, but it really identifies the religious beliefs of the individuals plus their immigrant status when they came in. And you can't see him very well, but you see this couple that are on the pew. Right behind him, there's a picture of there's a guy with a little suit back there in the dark. That's my grandpa, Jose. They had a car dealership there. They had a library where you could get your gas. You had, it was a full one-stop shop for everybody who lived there. I do remember reading somewhere that if you wanted a Ford, you had to go to Raton to get your car. But I have to say, every time my spouse and I make the trip to Dawson or to Raton, my mother used to spend her summers in Rivera at her uncle's ranch. And back in those days, if you had a lot of kids, they used to ship them off to other relatives just to kind of, one, I think, get them out of their hair, but two, to help sort of reduce the cost of food and also help the extended relatives to, you know, be able to get the work done at a reasonable price. And I always envisioned what it was like to try to drive in a vehicle like this. It's not like it is today going up I-25. And I'm hoping to have enough time here so we have some folks from Dawson who can share some of their remembrances of the area. They had a hospital. There's also one in Dawson that they used to use, but they had a dispensary, they had a hospital, and full services there, as modern as it could be in those days. I love this picture of the telephone operator in particular because my mom and her sisters started out as telephone operators in Dawson. And this is where they started. This is a fancy telephone book here, and we've got the fancy bakery with, you know, again, this place has been around since quite early in the 1900s. So it grew with technology over time. But I love this picture because I can just imagine my mom and my Aunt Elsie sitting there plugging in with these headsets. They had schools. The schools were evidently remarkably good. And when we went to the reunion this time, there were some folks that actually had on their Dawson sweaters, which I thought was really kind of cool. My mom had many of her family members go through the high school and elementary schools there. And over here, you can't see it, but that's my Aunt Elsie. And over here is my mom, my beautiful mom, Juliana. But I understand that it was, when I talk to folks about Dawson, who are up here in Las Vegas and northern New Mexico, they always talk about the quality of the school there. Those students that graduated from there went on to college. They went on to do wonderful things, and that they were good with competitions. And I guess their athletics were remarkably strong. And I mentioned the cemetery. If you're ever up towards Raton and Dawson, it's worth popping into the cemetery and taking the time to walk through it. And again, the reason why I think Dawson is no longer a ghost town is that family members get together on the Labor Day weekend of the picnic, and various different people volunteer to go and help clean up the cemetery. This is an old cemetery, but look how wonderfully it's maintained, and it's done by the family members. It's done by the descendants of people who are resting here in this Dawson Cemetery, and that is, I think it's remarkable. We have a cemetery that's been abandoned, if you will. There's nobody living there, but the descendants keep this cemetery up, and it is on our National Registry as a historic place. So I would encourage you to go there. So the big thing that happened to this place in 1950, it closed. Dawson closed, picked up everything, and headed out of town. They were no longer able to be there. Everything closed, the school, and people just left. They had to take everything with them, and you can see from this letter, they had to be out of there. What's the date? They had to be out of there by June. And it was really quite powerful when I listened to folks who are from Dawson, their family members. It had quite an impact. And again, these pictures come from the various donations and postings on the Facebook page. I'm not a huge Facebook fan, but I do go to this one on a regular basis, and I've been able to chat with people who grew up next to my mom, people who knew my Aunt Dolores and my Uncle Max. And for a community to all of a sudden have to pick up and go, I can't imagine what that did. You get a couple of months notice, and now you have to leave. You have to take everything with you. And there's nothing, you can't sell your home. Well, those homes didn't belong to them. They belonged to Phelps Dodge. You have to take what you can and go find a whole new life. And people went from there. Some people went to California, some people went to Arizona. A lot of those folks moved to Las Vegas. A lot of the community moved down to Albuquerque and had to find new jobs. And people like my grandfather, who were uneducated, he didn't have I think he got to the second grade. He took what jobs he could get in Albuquerque. He was a laborer. And a lot of families in those situations. I can't imagine being told today you have to leave and take everything that you need to go with you. And I think these pictures are really very telling of what it was like to leave. They lost everything in so many ways, but the one thing that they did have was their families and their community. And again, they've kept it together. The churches there was a great posting that was listed by Mary Frances Reza, who was one of my mom's friends, Mary Frances. I heard about her my entire life, this Mary Frances. Finally got to meet her in 2010. But they gave away a lot of the pieces in the various churches that were there, in the schools. They gave things away to different communities because there was nothing else they could do with them. And that church is no longer standing. But what I find interesting, it'd be really interesting to find out how many of these items, especially the statues and the altar, if they're still warehoused and archived in Santa Fe, the Archdiocese. And here we've got some pictures of people moving out. They're packing up the trophies at the school, at the high school, and just getting ready to leave. And this reminds me of pictures that I've seen from the Dust Bowl, when people were leaving out of Oklahoma in the Midwest, when there were things, there was no longer a place for them to be. So we do have some connections to Mexico Highlands University, and I want to highlight those. And then I'm hoping I can show you this video because it's a really wonderful video, and some of you may have already seen it. But when I got here, we had hired a woman, a director of our nursing program, Dr. Jeannie Flood. She came here from Hawaii. And when I first met her, I said, well, you're coming from Hawaii to northern New Mexico. What brought you here? Well, it turns out her spouse's grandfather is from this area, and they have family here. And her grandfather was one of the coaches at the high school. And that's pretty darn cool. And I know they've gone to the last couple of reunions that have been held as well. So that was pretty cool. Of course, I can't do this without my mother. She was a majorette. She graduated in 1950. That's her on the right, and that's her in her majorette outfit. And she was a little tiny thing. She was only about 4'10", very petite. But from what I understand, you know, the classes weren't very big, so everybody got to know each other. And at the last reunion a couple of weeks ago, and I have met Petra Tovar and her daughters, Veronica and Victoria. I met them back in 2010, and Petra was neighbors of my mother. And lo and behold, when we were there a couple of weeks ago, I found out that they were NMHU graduates. I had no clue, so that was really quite fun to see. And I understand Mary Frances, I mentioned her before, she was also a graduate of Highlands. Oh, here's somebody, I'm going to read the postings. This is, oh, she could hear the music. Well, Deborah, I think it says Gonzales. I can't read the whole name. I was born and raised in Raton, and my grandfather and dad were coal miners. They lived in Van Houten. Wow, that's cool. What they called the coal camps, and I enjoy the stories my mom was told us. Would you know, Dr. Gonzales, and Van Houten is closed to the public? It is not. The only time you cannot get there, so you go into the NRA Wittering Center and you just ask them, is the road to Van Houten open or closed? They close it when there's flooding, and they close it when there's a bunch of big ranges back there. So if there's a competition going on at that end of the range, they will close it so that you don't get hurt. So it is open to the public 7 days a week. So it was worth the trip. We probably spent about an hour there, and they actually have one of the mines that you can go to. And then H.S. Robertson says some of the houses were moved. There were several in Raton. That's interesting. I did not know that. Now, I know for a couple of years my mom lived in Raton, but that was before they actually moved over to the Dawson camp. Let's get this thing going here. And one of the most, I think, notorious, if you will, in some circles, Dolores Huerta, she was the recipient last year of our honorary doctorate here, but she was born in Dawson, New Mexico, and then moved to Las Vegas and then on to California. And if you don't know Dolores's story, she was quite the rabble rouser. She worked side by side with Cesar Chavez, and quite an advocate for labor unions and working people in the fields and miners. She was just, and to this day, I was really so excited to finally get to meet her a couple of weeks ago. And a very petite woman, but a very powerful and an influential woman. And she, just a great woman. If you ever have a chance that she comes back up this way, it's worth the time to meet her. So I contend that Dawson is not a ghost town. I contend that through its descendants and its activities that they do every 2 years, that it lives. And it lives on through its descendants. It lives on through those that are still here with us. And while the buildings might be gone and people are spread across the country, it lives. To this day, I have a cousin, and I don't know if she's on now, my cousin Tina. She and I talk about our moms talking about Dawson. Even my aunts that were born here in Albuquerque later, they heard stories of Dawson, and they talk about Dawson. One of the cool things I learned is I became friends with a couple of individuals. Angel Munoz, for example, he graduated the year before my mom, but he and I spent time talking on the phone about Dawson, and we'd never met before 2010. And he sent me all kinds of wonderful memorabilia with my mom's name on it, a little calling card. I don't know why he had my mom's calling card, but he did. And the program to her high school graduation and some other pieces that were related to my mom in the high school. So this was also posted online, but it's also in the Facebook pages. The first reunion was held in 1954. So we're not talking about a long, 20, 30 years until there was a reunion. The people that moved to California had a reunion in 54. It even made the newspaper. And when you get these slides, these links that are here are live links. There's a Dawson Association, which has all kinds of great information. It has a page of list of individuals who have passed away. And if you're interested, I would certainly click on that link and just go peruse the site. When people pass, you can send the information to this page and they'll post it, and you can they'll post the obituary. So I think since 1954, maybe it was a ghost town between 50 and 54, but I contend that it's not dead. It's not a ghost town. And here's some pictures from this last reunion. I just randomly took pictures. So you can see there are people of all ages here. We went to one of the tables. They were selling etched glasses with Dawson and New Mexico symbols on them. And this gentleman remembered Mr. Flood. And so he was born in the 40s there. So he comes to the reunion. So it's not just the Dawsonites, but his spouse. And then I didn't grow up there, but this is one of the things I really enjoy doing over Labor Day weekend. It's just a joy to see the people, hear what people are doing. And when my mom passed away, we did a memorial in Albuquerque for her, and Immaculate Conception. And people that she grew up with in Dawson attended her memorial service. That's how close this community is. They're across the country, they're spread out, but they remember each other and they honor each other, which I think is remarkable. This is a documentary that, it's a 17-minute documentary, and I am going to really try to play this so that we can see it. I don't know how many of you have probably seen it, but it's a wonderful documentary. And I'm going to start it, and we're going to see if I can share that page with you. So right now you should just see me. Let me make myself bigger so I can see what I'm doing. And let's hope that this works. I'm hoping there's no green screen. Here we go. Can somebody put in the chat if you can see it? Or give me a thumbs up. Thank you.
When you go into town, you drive up Main Street. And they had the gymnasium first, and then they had the store.
And then the post office. And then on the left-hand side was the doctor's office. And then you had to climb a hill to get up to the high school.
We had a theater. We had a swimming pool. We had 2 wonderful schools, and they had 7 mines. It was like a little city. We were really, really close. Just like one big family. If you were from Dawson, you were in that clan.
That's the town right there. You drive into town right through here. And you come right in, and this is the main street going up like this. So here's the high school. So our house had to be right about there. And this is the inside of the store. That's a nice store, huh? The Opera House. Movies were like 10 cents. I really like those movies.
My dad, you know, he passed away February the 28th. He had a premonition once before he had said, you know what's going to happen? This town's going to close, and I'll end up here by myself. And we said, no, I don't think so, Dad. You know, because everything was working good. But then they started using the oil for the diesel and the engines. And I guess they started doing away with coal. So, and it happened. Yeah, you have some flowers.
They put up a notice that Dawson was being closed, that the whole camp had to be closed and everybody had to leave. No exceptions, everybody was gone.
It was just a shock when Dawson closed. Nobody thought that was going to happen.
The roads were just full of people moving out, trucks with furniture, just in rows.
And it was scary. It was scary because you can't imagine what's going to happen. What is going to happen?
And this church here, the Catholic Church, my brother and I and the Palominos, we helped tear it down. They couldn't afford to be getting sued if people moved in there and they got hurt or something, you know. So they just decided to tear it all down.
There's nothing left really, you know, because all the buildings are down and everything's just gone. I look at it now and I think, I can't believe that there was actually a town here.
It's hard to believe that at one time there was people living there. I don't know how many buildings. Now you go back and there's nothing. You don't even see foundations. A lot of the houses were sold and moved. And then the ones they didn't move, they just tore down, smokestacked, they blew it up, just demolished the places.
The weeds, everything is taken over, so nothing is familiar. It's just changed. You would never know what was there. To look out at where we used to live and the town as it is, it's very sad, very sad. Just can't believe that you were once, you know, living there, and now there's nothing. It's hard to believe, but it was once upon a time.
I'm actually going to end the video because I want to offer some time for people to be able to talk with us. And I'm going to move my PowerPoint to the next one and get you to be able to see. So where am I with Zoom? Let me share my slide presentation, because I know we have folks on here who are from Dawson, and that video we're going to be recording this, and so you'll be able to get to that live link. It is a wonderful video, and it actually has a nice little clip of Angel that I talked about. But I want to give credit to everybody that I stole most of this from the Facebook page, but there are contributors on a regular basis, and want to make sure that everybody knows that. And there will be a book coming out next year from Nick Pappas. He's done a nice a real historical study of Dawson, New Mexico. And I would encourage you all to be able to maybe look for it and purchase it and support him. He's done a lot of he's done real historical research. He's a retired journalist. So I would love to have open the floor for conversation. I think, again, my premise is Dawson is not a ghost town. Dawson lives through its family members, its descendants, and to go to those reunions and see students and kids running around, little ones. Somebody made a comment when I was there that they didn't think it would go on for many more years, but I would suggest that as long as there are individuals who are interested in history and family, that it will remain as it is a wonderful place for family to continue to keep that spirit of Dawson alive, that community extends beyond building. So I invite anyone, I see some familiar names on here. So please just raise your hand and let's have a little dialogue. What are your memories of Dawson? What are your memories of your mom talking about Dawson? Anybody? Come on.
Roxanne, if I could ask a question. You know, so many neat historical documents have been preserved related to the town. I'm just wondering, you know, is there a place where people who may have other documents or whose families may have artifacts can give those to be collected or give those to be maintained?
What everybody's recommending, because I think, you know, as members pass, we inherit these beautiful documents, right? And we want to make sure, one, either that we keep a copy for ourselves, but what I would suggest is that the Raton Museum is probably the place for those documents to go, because they have a huge, huge collection of the mining industry in the region. So they have things on Van Houten, they have things about Raton. They have a ton of documentation from Dawson. In fact, a lot of the pictures that I have of my mom in high school come from the yearbooks that they have. I was able to get all the yearbooks and my aunts and uncles. So certainly that's where I would suggest if people have things. The other thing I would suggest is, you saw the name of you can post them on the website in the group. And I love, I go there frequently. And one of the reasons I go there is because I see names of people, I don't know who they are, but it really tells the story of what it was like to live there. And I posted something one time about my mom, and lo and behold, I got somebody replied, "Oh, they live next door to us." And your Aunt Dolores says, Marilyn's godmother was my mother. I mean, you know, you find these little precious gems that I would never have known about. So there's a couple of things in here. Michelle Gonzales made a comment. This in the documentary echoes everything Mom